Hi, good morning or afternoon, I guess it is. Why Isqueeze, Kitapalks. My name is Cindy Marchand and I'm from the Colville Tribes. I'm a councilman, but I'm also your RTOC Eastern representative. Today, I think you've already heard from Cindy Fields. She had the great presentation on the QAPs. She is EPA Regional Quality Assurance Manager since November of 2022, so she's new. But she brings 20 years of experience working with environmental information to support our tribal and state partners in Region 10. Also, while Cindy was talking, Stacy's my next one, I'm sorry. While she was talking, a lot of things came up about QAPs and then also her protecting participants in community surveys is important information for tribes. And being from the Colville Tribes before I was on council, I worked under their environmental department where we've done a lot of these different types of studies. We have a CERCLA site up there. And so I'd offer anyone who would like to talk to me or get my card, we've done a lot of this work and we would be more than happy to give you templates or tools that we've had to use and pay good money from our consultants for, that we would be more than happy to share with you in doing your work. I'd also like to thank the Shoshone-Bannock tribe for hosting us. The lands are beautiful here. We appreciate your hospitality, the great meals, and also, we would like to thank Jane Nishida for being out here from EPA. She's our deputy director, and she's here to listen, and we welcome her. So again, thank you, Cindy, for being here. Excuse me. And welcome again. So also there is another session going on next door if anybody was interested. This one is protecting participants of fish consumption surveys. And then next door is state of play for important federal lands initiatives. So that's also going on next door if anybody was interested in that one. I don't want to take your crowd, but I'll just let you know.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Fields, EPA Region 10's Quality Assurance Manager since November of 2022, as Cindy said. But I also am the region's Human Subject Officer. And so for the past 6 months at EPA, I've devoted a lot of time in trying to understand the human subject research review process so that I can present this to you so that it can help you when you are developing fish consumption surveys, which I know is very important. You obviously have noticed maybe that I did change the title, and that is just because the human subject research review process is not related only to fish consumption surveys, but it comes into play anytime that you want to do research in a way that you're interacting with the public. So if you are thinking about developing a study that engages the community to learn more about that community's habits and preferences, if it's funded by EPA or might be used to inform future EPA decisions, then there are certain guidelines that need to be followed, plans that need to be developed and reviewed to ensure that the community's private information stays private and that they know what they're signing up for. In other words, that they have given their free and informed consent and are protected from the misuse of any information that they provide the researcher. Thank you. Next slide, please. So my purpose here today, and if you could just click through these following questions, is to answer the few questions about what is human subject research? Why do projects involving community research have these requirements? Who is performing the review of the research plans? How does that review process work? And most importantly, when can I start my research project? Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with some key definitions. EPA loves acronyms, so I have sprinkled a few throughout this presentation. First of all, we'll start with human subject research, which is abbreviated as HSR. And basically it's research that's involving interactions with people. Next is an institutional review board, or an IRB. And this is a committee that's charged with protecting the rights and the welfare of the study participants. We also have headquarters has an EPA human subject research review official. We call that person the HSRO. And they provide agency oversight of the human subject research. And then EPA's Region 10 Human Subject Officer, as I mentioned, is another title that I hold. And I am the liaison between our region and the HSRO that sits in DC. And during this presentation, I'm going to use the term EPA Project Officer to describe your tribal coordinator or your grant officer. And I'm going to use the term Principal Investigator to describe the lead researcher for the tribe. And then last of all is my favorite topic, Quality Assurance Project Plans, which is a required document for whenever you're collecting, evaluating, or using environmental information. I'm not going to stay on this slide for too long because it's going to come back later, but I just wanted to show you that there is quite a substantial review process for the plans, all the way from a technical review through QA, responding to comments, and then it goes to an independent review at an institutional review board, and final approval is given by the HSRO in DC before your project can start. So this is can be a lengthy process. So we're talking anywhere from 6 to 12 months sometimes for this process. So what is human subject research? 1 minute, I'm just catching up my notes. So not every project involving community members is considered human subject research. Next slide, please. So the first question that you need to ask is, does your project fit the formal definition of research? And basically this means that it's a systematic investigation that's going to lead to generalizable knowledge. So what do those terms mean? Next slide, please. So what is research? Is it research? Part one is a systematic investigation. And that just means, does your project have a plan? For example, a quality assurance project plan. Are you using defined methods? For example, if you have developed a questionnaire and you plan to ask people to fill it out. And then finally, are you going to repeat those methods in the same manner? Does everybody in your survey get the same questionnaire to fill out? Essentially, your investigation has a system in place, and that is what a systematic investigation is. Next slide. So part two is that generalizable knowledge piece. So once you have the results of the research, what are you going to do with those results? This is where this term comes in. And it means basically that you're going to draw some conclusions from the knowledge that you gain, and that you're going to share that information to fill a knowledge gap. And finally, that the information is intended to have an impact on others. So if your study fits both systematic investigation and generalizable knowledge, then it is indeed research. Okay, so if your study does qualify as research formally, is it considered human subject research? And now we have a few more questions to answer. So to meet the federal definition of human subject research, the research must be performed on people that are living. However, some institutional review boards choose to include people who were once living in the past in their definition of human subject research as well. Second, does the research seek an opinion or focus on the behavior of the individual through interaction? The food consumption surveys may fall under this question. And will the research result in collecting identifiable private information? And that depends on how the study is designed and what is needed to answer the tribe's question. Do you need participant names and contact information, or can the study be conducted anonymously? Next slide, please. So if it is human subject research, there is a category in which it can be exempt from the full level of review by the Institutional Review Board and the HISRO. So exempt research is defined by federal regulation. And even if a study does meet the exemption requirements within that regulation, it still may need to have a smaller review done by that Institutional Review Board and the HISRO. And then there are certain other requirements within the regulation that may apply, such as the Paperwork Reduction Act or EPA's privacy policy, and your project officer can help you figure out if there are more requirements. Can you go back one more, please? It's okay. So when is it exempt research? According to the regulations, if the identity of the participants is kept confidential, then it may be exempt from that full review. We want to make sure that any responses that our participants give can't get them in trouble, so there's no risk to their financial standing or employability or educational advancement opportunities or even their reputation. And then finally, if the identity of the participants is not confidential, an institutional review board may still have the discretion to identify it as exempt research based on other protocols. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So why do projects involving community research have these requirements? I'm going to give you a warning that this part starts with some dark history. Next slide, please. So after some really terrible things were done with respect to how research was being conducted, including but not limited to the Tuskegee syphilis study, in which 400 African-American men were enrolled in a study without their informed consent and were denied medicine for decades. The government implemented a system to protect all participants to encourage ethical research based largely on the Nuremberg Code, which came out of the Nazi doctor trials after World War II, and established 10 basic principles to satisfy moral, ethical, and legal concepts. So the regulation is literally called the Protection of Human Subjects, and it contains specific protections for children and nursing mothers, as well as special rules related to pesticide exposure research. EPA has codified it as 40 CFR Part 26. We also have a policy and procedure that explains the how and the why. Other agencies have it listed under a different federal regulation, and to make it all a lot easier to say, it's referred to often as the common rule. So in 1991, EPA joined with 16 other federal agencies to implement that common rule. Next slide, please. So some of the protections within the common rule are that participation is informed and voluntary. The study must address important questions, and the benefits of participating outweigh the risk for the participants. Independent review is also part of the common rule and is essential to ensure that decisions are made without inappropriate influences that could bias the evaluation of the risks and the benefits. A quality assurance project plan is needed to document how the study will be conducted, including consent forms, informed consent forms, questionnaires, and the applicable QAP elements that I mentioned in my last talk. And then independent review is performed by an institutional review board working with the tribe developing the study, followed by review of the HISRO, as you might remember from the wheel diagram that I had showed earlier. And then my advice would be to a tribe that wants to develop a fish consumption survey is to identify and develop a relationship with that institutional review board early in the process, so that you know what their expectations and requirements are, and you're not taken by surprise later down the road. Next slide, please. So who is performing the review of the research plans? Next slide. So the Institutional Review Board is usually affiliated with the university, college, or a health program, such as the Indian Health Service. It's a group that's been formally designated to review and monitor research involving human participants. And the intent is to protect the rights and the welfare of people recruited to participate in research activities. And they have the authority to approve, disapprove, exempt, monitor, and require modifications in all research activities that fall within its jurisdiction. The Human Subject Research Review Official, or the HSRO, reviews the IRB's decision and needs to see all of the documents and correspondence between the tribe and the IRB during the IRB's review process. They will also review the research plan to ensure that the researchers are using best practices in study design and methodology. And the EPO project officer will coordinate with the human subject officer, and I will coordinate with the HSRO in order to make that review happen. And then finally, HSRO approval is required prior to the start of work. Next slide, please. Here are just some examples of institutional review boards we have that are affiliated with tribes in Region 10. There's the Indian Health Services, the Northwest Indian College, the Portland Area Indian Health Service, and the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium. All have independent institutional review boards that are independent, and I can provide these links separately, but they're links to where you can find more information online, including contact information for those IRBs. And before we go on to the next slide, I do want to mention that there may be costs associated with having an institutional review board review your plan. These costs can be between $1,000 and $2,000. And I suggest that you could speak to your grant officer, tribal coordinator on how to incorporate that into your grant when you're first developing that proposal. And then the other thing that I want to say is that the schedule for IRBs may be different. Some meet only once per month, and some others only certain months of the year. Others review on demand. So your review can take place really quickly, or it can lag for a long time. So when you're developing that schedule and that budget, make sure that you have that communication with the IRB so that you understand what their time frame is. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so how does this review process work? So all projects begin with a plan. A quality assurance project plan is going to be needed because data of unknown or uncertain quality can undermine the scientific integrity of a study and make an otherwise sound study invalid. So, and of course, a QAP is always needed anytime you want to collect, use, or evaluate environmental information with EPA funding or for EPA decision-making. The QAP can be combined with a research study design and should contain enough detail to allow independent review and assessment of the scientific soundness of the study and the approaches that will be followed to ensure that the study meets the highest scientific and ethical standards. So some items that your document can include are what are the project roles and who will fill them, what statistics will be used to evaluate the results of the study, how much training should an interviewer have, and how will the interviews be conducted, how and where will data be entered, managed, and stored, and how will confidentiality be handled, and finally, how will the data that you get be assessed. Next slide. Here are some more useful links to some information, links to help you design your quality assurance project plan, including the website that we have developed for tribes in Region 10 with some templates and examples. EPA also has a quality assurance project plan development tool, which is broken up into different modules. And then there's the participatory science quality assurance handbook and toolkit, which provides some examples and some templates that you can use to develop that QAP. And then for the research study design, I have provided a link to more information on human subject research, what is required for the HSRO review and approval, And then provided also another example of an IRB. This is from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and I included it because I thought that their website provided a really good overview of institutional review boards and working with them in general. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and so now we're back to our wheel. So at this point, you have pre-coordinated with your IRB, you've written your plan, you've included the QA elements and designed the research study, and your plan is now ready for review. So you'll work with your project officer, and they will help coordinate the technical and the quality assurance reviews within EPA. And then they will work with the principal investigator to respond to any comments and make sure that the documents are in good shape to go to the institutional review board, which is next. And that would be submitted to the IRB by the principal investigator for the tribe. And if you've been coordinating with them up to this point, then they should know when to expect the document, and you should know how long it should take them to review the document. And then finally, once the institutional review board has finished their review, they could send it back to the principal investigator and the project officer for additional edits or more training or a different format. And so there might be another round of review and response to comments there. But once it's all fully packaged up, then that is provided to the HISRO in DC, and they will provide their final review and their final approval. And so again, I just want to reiterate that this can be a long process. It can take up to 6 to 12 months in some cases. So next slide. So the biggest question is, when can I start? And I think you've all heard me, not until the HISRO has given their approval. Next slide, please. So allow 6 to 12 months in your schedule. Consider outside factors that will influence your schedule, such as the IRB's review time frame, or maybe even the season in which you want to perform the work and your participants, and if they will be available once your project is ready to start. So select an IRB to work with and engage with them early, and engage with EPA's project officer and myself as well. I'm happy to help answer any questions and work with our tribal coordinators to help you. Next slide, please. So in summary, this presentation has hopefully shown you that if you are planning to collect information about communities with interaction, through interaction with them, including the fish and subsistence food consumption surveys, if you want to draw conclusions from that information, share that information and make an impact on your community, then your study might require a potentially lengthy review process. Quality assurance project plans are going to be required. An institutional review board approval is going to be required, and the human subject research review official at headquarters, their approval is going to be required. And last slide. This is my email address. I also have business cards I'm happy to pass out. Please come find me and let me know if anyone has any questions.
Okay, we'll go to questions. I'm just curious, those in the audience, has any of our tribal environmental folks been involved in a fish consumption or seafood consumption survey for their tribe? Just curious if anyone's gone through the process. I know a lot of my team has been the project officer on that side, but okay, we got a few. Okay, great. So if you want to share, if you don't have a specific question about this process, if you want to share kind of your experience on that process previously, that would be a really good place to start in terms of people understanding what this all means, what it means to share this information with other folks so they can be more successful in planning. Feel free. So let me see if there are any volunteers just kind of share experience. Okay, Aaron.
Well, I think the difficulties when we did the fish consumption survey was getting our tribal input from the membership and working with the 3 communities to make sure that we got enough data And we had several different iterations to get people involved and trying to explain to them what it meant for the tribe to be able to develop our case for the state of Idaho in terms of the the rate in which we consume salmon. And it was a big deal. And I think this is a very difficult state to get information to the state of Idaho, very political. They don't want to hear a lot of stuff about the need to step up their game. And so I'll just say it from that perspective, it became very political. And, we didn't get what we wanted in terms of letting the data speak for itself. But I think, we still keep fighting for what's right.
Russ?
Thank you. Russ Hepfer, Laurel, Clallam Tribe. I just had a comment, not a question. The Washington State fish consumption rate is 175 grams per day, 10⁻⁵ with a cancer risk. We at Elwha, we don't have a fish consumption rate because you can see just to get started how cumbersome it is. And then I hear it's more expensive as you go along also. I don't know if that's true, but we use our neighbors' fish consumption rate as a comparison because we're similar in size and in almost same, not too far apart water-wise. But we think our rate is over 800 grams per day, which would be a suppressed rate because we don't have much fish anymore. So my worry is if my tribe does a fish consumption rate now with a suppressed rate, then other agencies or somebody else will say, oh, you don't eat that much fish. Don't worry about it. When historically, that's all we ate. So it's kind of a two-edged sword that I'm thinking that maybe getting a rate would be good. Maybe it won't be. I still haven't got past that fear. Thank you.
Hi, Cindy Marchand again, Colville Tribes, and I agree with Russ. Fish consumption rate development is very expensive. I lucked out, we're on the Upper Columbia River, and so some of the studies we did with that super fun like site gave us the tools to add on some other studies where we did develop our own fish consumption rate. We have the largest tribal study as far as a Superfund site in the nation. And so we were able to pull data from there. So the Colville Tribes, we have 400 grams per day, and that's our current use. And our neighbors, Spokane Tribe, they have 800 grams per day, which is a historical use. But I think it's important that tribes do have these rates only because whether you use a current rate like we did or a historical rate like Spokane's did, it is your trust the trust responsibility of the government to make sure that on your lands and your waters, you're able to do what you did in the past. So for example, we also on the Upper Columbia River site, we had some residential cleanup on allotments. We don't have people living there, but we did have the company do some cleanup of lead, and that's still going on up in the uplands. Because under our rights on allotments, we're allowed to build there anytime we want. So I think it is very spendy. And if you can tackle that and attach it onto other studies, I would definitely try to figure out how to do that. I hate to sound like I'm advertising, but the contractor I use, she's actually from Seattle and she's done it before. We've done our fish consumption rate. I also wanted to mention was Cindy up here talking about this IRB. It's a really scary process, or it seems like, but once you get through it, it's definitely good. I know we've had great luck with EPA allowing us to keep all of our data private. So it's not out there into the public. And so we had a lot of trouble with that also, as far as collecting data of our people that hold our resources, like our elder up here. And I do have to say that we've had a positive experience with EPA in this IRB process. So again, I would be more than happy to give you my card, any information, any type of anything I could help you guys with, I would be more than happy to.
Yeah, hello, thank you. Lee Wan Tyler, Shoshone Tribes. We had the same time as the Nez Perce tribe brought to our attention. I think that was when Dennis McLaren was the regional administrator over here in Region 10, and we had discussions with Idaho and Boise, and so we implemented this. They gave us, I think, 10,000 each, and other three tribes in Idaho didn't do one. We did one. We did a survey. It came to the reservation, had to do it in a certain time frame. But then with all the Superfund sites around here, with all the blocked areas, we tried to do what we could, because up at Hells Canyon Complex, I don't know if you guys know where it's at. When Louise was doing the cultural study on the map, you can see how Idaho is, and then it does Hells Canyon Complex. It blocked real huge major runs down here, like 5 areas. I use my finger on my hand right here. 5 areas, Payette River, Weiser River, Boise, Wahi, and I'm all here. And then all the tributaries that's related to it, Bruno, there's so many of them. It was the largest salmon run in the lower 48, and sturgeon and Andromedus fish, all types, was blocked in 1960. So we try to do a survey, but we said the historical, we try to give them historical data and to oversee that. And back then they were trying to say we didn't have a treaty because we have a case going on. Then we had to go to the Supreme Court, and then we was challenged through Herrera case, another issue that the Crow tribe have the same treaty as us. We have off reservation rights. So that's another issue, but we won. So now Hell's Canyon out there, they're operating out of compliance. And how are they allowed to do that? You know, a hydropower company. And then they're violating the Endangered Species Act, they're violating the Clean Water Act. And then still they're getting a temporary permit every year. And so their relicensing is up. So what do? We're trying to go to FERC, and we're trying to get support. And it seems like it gets nowhere. Never ending battle. So what do? We got to unite with the tribes and all the regions. But they were saying we could only eat 1 teaspoon. I think a month or a week or something. 1.75 grams. I don't know. That's kind of ridiculous. But that's how, otherwise you'll get cancer. That was some of the contaminations around here with the Superfund site, especially even trout. We couldn't even eat the trout, resident fish. So it's a pretty sad situation. I don't think I went off the subject, but that's kind of how we did. But I'm not the expert on that. Our fishery department's not here. I was trying to look for something, but maybe next time we could find something. Thank you.
Thanks, Lewan. When I was sitting here thinking, a lot of tribes are interested in doing this to influence the state site or state fish consumption. But also I was trying to think of what the interplay will be with the baseline water quality standards for reservations, and then what you want to use to set your own water fish consumption rates under those new water quality standards for reservations. So I don't have that answer, but it's a really interesting interplay. Kayla?
Thank you. And Gayla Hossett with Alaska. I was just thinking as we're sitting here, this is complex. This was what, 45 minutes of a presentation. I think that we should really do like a 3-day work group for Region 10 that we understand fish consumption rates. What does that mean with our state? Alaska's 6.5. I shared fish spread with you guys and joked around that you guys are only allowed to have 1 cracker, because that's really our daily consumption rate of what we have for Alaska. And like with Russ's concerns, if we increase that, how does that then affect us? And then we have areas around Alaska who are no longer getting salmon. And so, if we did like a 3-day work group, talking group, education, it's complex. There's many different layers. We could even break it out for those who are on our reservations, and then also where the state has jurisdiction on those. I think that would be something that we could maybe EPA could fund.
Thanks, Gayla. Raymond Paddock, Alaska. Just to add to that too, this is the fish consumption rate work is something that, you know, we were trying to pick up in Southeast Alaska back in the 2015, 2016 time, before the Trump administration. But the complexities of it was insane. I mean, even getting an idea of the cost to do it, from hiring a statistician to contracting out, you know, I think those would be super helpful to get an understanding, especially if you're going to do it in a region or versus a whole state and things of that nature. So just an idea, even the cost of it and the time amount that you put into it. What would be the most effective ways to ensure that the stats that we are getting are legit? So just to add to that, I think it would be very beneficial to have a training.
I'm building the RTOC agendas as we as we move. Catherine?
Hey, for those of you who I haven't met, my name is Catherine and I serve as a tribal coordinator for South Central Alaska out of EPA's Seattle office. And I've been working on fish consumption, Alaska fish consumption, for about 12 years and have watched very carefully the amazing work that's been done by CritFic, by Washington tribes, by Idaho tribes. And I feel very lucky to have worked with tribes in South Central Alaska to do the first 2 sets of Alaska tribal fish consumption surveys. Were conducted by Cook Inlet and Kodiak tribes. And I've really been impressed that Southeast and Bristol Bay, I've heard, are interested in conducting surveys as well. I do think that tribes collecting this data, documenting how much fish you are currently eating, documenting how much fish you have been eating historically is very important. Not only important to state or tribal water quality standards, but also to cleanup levels. If there are major projects or impacts, the rates become important there. So I don't want folks to feel discouraged by the process. It does take a lot to develop a work plan. It does take a lot to develop a quality assurance project plan. And it does take a lot to go through this additional step of the human subjects research review, but it is doable. And it is especially doable if you work together. Multiple tribes working together or through consortia really works. In my humble opinion, as someone who was once an environmental program manager myself, I don't see it as easily doable by one small tribe alone. But if you get together as regions or a couple of tribes, it is doable. And in terms of cost, it really depends. The studies that we did in South Central Alaska, I would say a couple $100,000. And it ended up taking 4 to 5 years. But some of the studies in Washington have cost millions. And I know that the work in Idaho for the tribes there was approximately $2.5 million by the end of it. So I don't want folks to be discouraged. I want you to hear how important collecting your own data is, and we are here to help. It's not easy, but nothing important ever is it? So anyway, I'm here in the Seattle office, available, and we have other folks with some experience in fish consumption, and we have lots of tribes out here that have done their own research and can share their plans, and we can help you get through it if you're interested in doing it. Do I wonder if it's an environmental justice issue? Okay, let's take, go to Lee one.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a few more comments that the eldest of my elders are passing on. So their fish consumption rate, I guess, would be historical. But most of our membership eat shellfish now. So that adds another layer to the fish consumption rate. And in Washington State, there was no studies, there was no surveys, it was all political. They decided, well, Oregon has 175 grams per day, we'll do that. And they tried to talk Idaho into that. I don't think it got very far here. But what I'm afraid of is not only the cost and the hoops and hurdles you have to go through. 'Cause I don't know, and listening to Cindy, I'm a little less fearful of information that'll come out of a fish consumption rate. But I'm still fearful that agencies will say, well, you don't eat fish anymore. There's no fish. So you don't need them, you know, those numbers don't count. So I'm not afraid to fight, but I pick my battles. So I guess I'll leave it at that. I've been doing fish consumption rate issues for over 20 years with the Fish Commission. And we finally got it set. It was a concession. Boeing went into Gregor's, the governor at the time, and said, hey, we're leaving. They already had a plant going somewhere else. So that's the fear factor from the industry side. We're gonna leave because we can't pollute your waters anymore. We're leaving. So there's a lot of layers to fish consumption rates. And I'm not afraid of it. I just wonder if it's good for my tribe. And I assume it is, but still there's all these other things involved. Thank you.
Ray's got a redirect.
My apologies. So just to add to what Russ was saying in regards to initially not just fish, but adding in shellfish and things of that nature. In Alaska, marine mammals is definitely one that would like to add on. And a proposal we had back in 2014, 2015 was to change the name of the fish consumption rate to a seafood consumption rate. We thought that made more sense. It adds in all the aquatic life that we take into us. So, and then in regards to raising a fish consumption rate, I think there's also concern in, say, we do raise it up to 175 grams. There's also concerns of the state lowering the human health criteria to ensure that they can still push forward the development process of minings or oil development, anything of that nature. So there's two things to keep in mind when raising a fish consumption rate and asking for it to go up, is ensuring that the human health criteria goes up with it as well.
Anyone? Yeah, maybe. Anyone else want to share? Any experiences, comments? Okay. Well, thank you for that conversation. Let's give Cindy a hand of applause for getting up there and walking us through this.